Hey everybody, this is JDGaming, back today with a deck profile of Sky Strikers. Now, whatever your personal thoughts are on this deck and its long-running competitive history that maybe was a bit overspent, I personally really love this deck. It's one of my favorites because it focuses on the core mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh! Simple consistency, one-for-one negation and disruption, and it's still a blast for me to play to this day. And looking back, I realized I haven't really updated it, even though within that time frame, Engage got banned, we got new support as well, so I figured it's high time to tackle this thing, especially because I know there were at least a couple of you guys out there that were specifically requesting it as well. So this is going to be a let's build. As always, I'll explain my choices and the key cards and considerations I have when adapting this deck for 2021, so that even if you've never played Sky Strikers before, if you're interested in maybe dabbling with them, seeing if maybe you like them, or if you just want to revisit them, all of that information will be in here, and hopefully you'll be able to play the deck by the end of the video. If you just want to see the completed list, you can go ahead and either use the chapter system that YouTube has, or table of contents in the description box down below. I always include that for your convenience, so you can jump to that part of the video, and then if you have any other questions, hopefully they've been answered for the most part within the contents of the video. But without further ado, let's build Sky Striker. The first step in building a deck is to establish the theme and to build a core that supports the theme's goals. And I think the first thing we want to consider here is what kind of deck is Sky Striker? It's obviously not a beatdown, as anyone who's seen the deck, it really can't OTK the opponent unless it uses a big Link 4 monster. Not really a stun type of deck where you're locking your opponent out of the game, and it certainly isn't a combo deck because there's not really a specific chain of cards you're trying to build in order to just outright win the game. This is definitely a control type of deck, and as you'll see, the key cards tend to work better if you're going second, and you'll want to side deck things that will be better if you're forced to go first. So generally, I would say you want to approach this deck with the idea of build it and play it like you're going to go second, and then you can pilot it accordingly. With that out of the way, we're starting off with 3 copies of our main monster, Sky Striker 𝗉𝗄. All of the key information will be here on the card so you can read it, but effectively this is a normal summon monster that is able to tag itself out by tributing herself into one of your Link 1 pilot monsters in your extra deck, which will trigger its abilities. And if this card is in your graveyard and one of your Sky Striker pilots in your extra monster zone leaves the field, you're able to go and special summon this card, including during the battle phase. This is your key bread and butter monster that allows you to go into your plays and have a lot of recursion on your plays so that you're able to keep your engine going. If you don't have access to Ray or any other Sky Striker 𝗉𝗄 monster early on in the game, you may be in trouble. And that's why it's helpful to have either Rose or Rose. Technically in Korean and Japanese, it's called 𝗏𝗏, so I'm not sure if you're supposed to pronounce it as one or two, but effectively, she mirrors Ray in very much what you'd expect. Same stats other than it being light, also a warrior, and she says if she's in your hand while you summon a Sky Striker 𝗉𝗄 monster, except during the damage step, you're able to drop her from your hand, so it makes it easy to summon Link 2 or higher monsters with that additional summon. Because she's a Sky Striker 𝗉𝗄 monster, you can go into extra deck plays for the theme with her, and if she's in your graveyard and your opponent's extra monster zone card leaves the field because of your card effect, which you're very much able to do thanks to the cards in this theme, you're able to revive her, and then without targeting, blank one monster your opponent controls on the field and prevent it from using its effects for the turn, which is pretty solid. You don't always use that ability, but you can kind of see how this card gets itself out of the hand easily and back from the graveyard in a way that parallels what Ray is able to do. But with this now, we have 5 copies of our key monsters that we can now launch into our extra deck. For those, we're starting off with 3 copies of Sky Striker 𝗉𝗏𝗃, a Link monster that needs any non-matching attribute of Sky Striker 𝗉𝗄 monster to summon. So since she's fire, you just need a non-fire. 1500 attack, but she gets larger because every spell in your graveyard, even off archetype, will gain you 100 attack points. And when she's summoned, even if it's during your opponent's turn, with Ray's tribute effect, for example, she's going to target one of your Sky Striker spells in your graveyard and let you add it to your hand. And because your Sky Striker spells don't have hard ones per turns, this allows for some ridiculous recursion, and it's the main reason why Engage had to be banned in the first place. However, with 𝗏𝗏𝗃 back to 3 now, 𝗏𝗏𝗃 is going to allow us to do all the recursion we need, and now we just need some way to access the cards we would like to play. And one thing that helps you do that is a parallel card in Sky Striker 𝗉𝗄 Shizuku. Now this thing needs any non-water, as you would imagine, and she has a debuff effect on all your opponent's attack and defense points for 100 per spell in your graveyard, much like how Kagari boosts herself. It's a little more interesting that this thing does lower your opponent's defense points because, unlike Kagari, which is a link monster, your opponent's monsters may have defense points. When Shizuku is summoned, during the end phase, just sometime in there, you could go ahead and resolve this effect to take one Sky Striker card from your deck that does not match one that's already in your graveyard and add it to your hand. We'll talk about this card once again when we get to multi-roll, but there is a nice interaction that's just based on core Yu-Gi-Oh mechanics that'll allow you to pick and choose which card you'd like to search, even if it technically is a duplicate of a card that you've already accessed. But this card lets you go and get something directly to your hand, which will make it so that next turn you can go and play it, and then Kagari can bring it right back as well, since again, these are not the same attributes as each other, and you can flip between them at will. Our third pilot is Sky Striker 𝕗𝖆𝖇𝖑𝖊. This one is interesting in that it does have a downward arrow. So whereas Shizuku I might summon in the right extra monster zone to make the opponent kind of go in the corner, and Kagari I may want to summon in the left monster zone, 𝕗𝖆𝖇𝑑 actually gives you an arrow. In addition, she can attack your opponent directly, and even if she doesn't do that, if she battles, she could be attacked. She could kill a monster, a token or something, or she does attack directly. She's able to, at the end of damage calculation, Foolish Burial Goods one of your Sky Striker cards from your deck to grave. And although a lot of times it will be a spell that you want to grab, you can also grab copies of Ray or Rose in case you haven't had those copies in your graveyard, and then that'll make sure that when 𝕗𝖆𝖇𝑑 dies, for example, you can go ahead and summon back the Ray from your graveyard, and it basically makes sure that your engine is as compact yet consistent as possible. So very powerful card all around, and much like Shizuku and Kagari where you want to use them pretty much every turn, you want to have access to 3 𝕗𝖆𝑇𝑑 as well. However, unlike the other cards that just straight up give you card advantage, this card is often partly your win condition if you can't cheat out a big link monster. So depending on the game, you may want to pace yourself carefully and don't just drop 𝕗𝖆𝑇𝑑 every single turn for the sake of it. If you already have a 𝕗𝖆𝑇𝑑, maybe try attacking with it a few times. Even if it's just a couple times, that 3,000 total damage is going to take you a big step towards winning the game, versus if you add up all 3 of these, you only have 4,500, and then if you lose that last 𝕗𝖆𝑇𝑑 with no form of recovery on the monsters, you may be struggling to win the game. So just keep that in mind. 𝕗𝖆𝑇𝑑 is actually able to win you the game by attacking. And then the last Sky Striker Ace monster for right now, for the Link ones, that I play one copy of is 𝗗𝗄. This is the Earth one. It's in here mainly because it's a different attribute, and sometimes its effect is useful. Anytime your Sky Striker spell card resolves, you immediately gain 100 life points after the activation or effect, which is a nice boost if you're in time or something. And on summon, it allows you to target, unfortunately, one face-up monster your opponent controls and make it so it cannot attack until the end of your opponent's turn. So the way that's worded, if your opponent already has a monster, you can summon this, blank it, and hopefully they won't summon something bigger or next to it. And even if this thing isn't already in play, let's say you have a 𝕗𝖆𝑇𝑑 in play, your opponent attacks this, you get to use its effect, of course, it dies, and so now you can summon your Ray. You can use Ray's effect to tag into a 𝗗𝗄, target a different monster, and make it so that that guy can't attack you. So this basically helps soften your opponent's assault so that you're not dying, and it forms a nice defensive core with the key cards we already have in things like Sky Striker, Ace, Ray. But other than that, you don't really summon 𝗗𝗄 every single game. It's very situational, and that's why it's the one that we play one copy of, and you play other Link monsters instead. Next, it's time to talk about the Sky Striker spell cards. Right off the bat, we're going to start off with basically a monster card. Hornet Drones is a quick play spell that says as long as you control no monsters in your main monster zone, which is a requirement on all of these cards pretty much, spawn one Sky Striker Ace token. And as a bonus unlock that these spells tend to have, if you have 3 or more of any type of spell card in your graveyard, so it doesn't even have to be Sky Striker, you get a bonus effect. In this case, the token would start off with 1,500 attack and defense points instead of 0. Again, not a hard once per turn on this, so you could summon Kagari off the token, recycle the Hornet Drones, and you could start to see why, even if you've never seen Sky Strikers before, oh, that's kind of why they had to limit Kagari at one point. It's because of things like this. And Hornet Drones is not restricting you into summoning any specific monster. It simply needs you to have no monsters in your main monster zones, in order to initially spawn that token. But still a very powerful card, even though this is currently at 1, and so you do want to play that, so you effectively have 6 Sky Striker Ace monsters, even with 3 Ray and 2 Rose. And then from there, we're going to talk about some of the utility cards here. So 𝕿𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓𝐻, this quick play spell has, again, same requirement of no monsters in your main monster zones to activate. You play it and target one of your opponent's face-up effect monsters, and you either blank its effect, and that's it if you have less than 3 spells in your grave, or if you reach that unlock Kickstarter campaign goal, you're able to go and steal that monster if you choose to do so. Just remember 2 things with this. You can play multiple copies in the same turn, so you could chain them while you still have no monsters in your main monster zone, but the moment you resolve one of these and take your opponent's monster, it's in your main monster zone, so you may lock yourself out of all your other cards. So you have to be very smart about what you're doing with these. Don't just play this, oh yeah, I'll steal your monster, and then make these other 2 copies dead because you can no longer fulfill the condition. You want to make sure you time it in a way where you could steal like your opponent's entire board at once if you have the cards to do it, and then you're going to get the full effect of each copy that you have. And kind of a parallel to that, which is a theme with this archetype, Shark Cannon. So for completeness, now you can go and target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish that monster, or if you have 3 or more spells in your grave, you get to go and summon that monster to your side of the field, but it cannot attack. However, you can go and use its effects, you can go and use it as link material. So the combination of 𝕿𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓𝐻 and Shark Cannon basically makes it so you can go and steal your opponent's board and parts of their graveyard and make a very big link 4 monster out of nowhere. So that's why we want to have 3 of each of these. It just gets you not only more control as 1-for-1 kind of negation or like a call by the grave type of removal effect, but you're able to go and actually build your own board with these in response. Next up, I like playing 2 copies of Sky Striker Maneuver Afterburners. The main reason we play 2 copies as opposed to 1 like in the past is because it's not searchable with Engage anymore because that card is banned, and so by playing 2 copies, we can somewhat frequently see it through draws without necessarily having to search it. And if you really have to, then sure, you still have Shizuku and Hayate with Kagari in tandem as well to get the cards. But effectively, this thing lets you go and destroy one of your opponent's monsters on the field by targeting it. Then, without targeting, if you have reached 3 or more spells in your grave, you can go and destroy a spell or trap on the field on either side. So that could be yours if you want to clear another card in the graveyard for some reason. That could be like maybe the field spell we'll talk about in just a moment. Or you could go ahead and just get rid of one of your opponent's back row for a bonus effect on this thing. I don't like main decking Jamming Waves. I think it's a very good card, especially if you have access to Engage, but I prefer to side it if that, because not every deck is going to be playing spells and traps where basically that card mirrors this one, and you can kind of see, oh yeah, they're both good, but I'd rather try and kill a monster, even if that's all I do, because that's more relevant across more matchups. This next card is actually different from the other spells. It is Terraforming combined with 2 copies of Sky Striker Airspace Area 0. It doesn't follow the same formula, but it does help you set up for your other abilities. Area 0 says you can target one other card you control, which is usually either a spell you want to land in the grave to hit the magic number of 3, or a copy of Ray because she can dodge this effect, as you'll see. You excavate 3 cards from the top of your deck, and if you do, you can add 1 Sky Striker card that you may have excavated from among those, and then if you did, you have to send this targeted card to the graveyard. If this card on the field is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can go ahead and special summon one of your pilots from your deck, which helps you get out an additional monster, or just get a monster in the first place to make sure you can access your link monsters. You can only use each of these abilities once per turn, but this is an interesting card in that it helps make sure everything sticks. Obviously, it would be pretty good to have some way of sending this to the graveyard as well, and so we'll have that as a consideration. Another similar feeling card that's actually way more powerful is Sky Striker Mecha Modules Multi-Role. Once per turn, you could target one other card you control, much like the field spell. You send it to the graveyard as its effect, and also your opponent cannot respond to your spell effects for the rest of the turn, so that means even if this card leaves the field, they can't Ash Blossom your Engage if that comes back, and that's really powerful. Of course, this is a continuous spell, so it is vulnerable to cards like, say, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, and that's why you'll want to kind of weigh the risks of, is it worth playing doing this immediately, but man, is there a huge incentive to do this. While it's on the field, you count the number of your Sky Striker spells you've played, and during the end phase, you get to add up to that number of differently named Sky Striker spells from your graveyard back to your field. You don't have to show where you're setting everything, so you can like choose everything, show them to your opponent, shuffle them up, place them on the field. They do get banished when they leave the field, but imagine all of the utility cards I just talked about, even the field spell, can be put back on your field and you didn't lose anything that turn. It's honestly kind of a restricted version of Spellbook of Judgment, but still very reminiscent of that card in that you basically get everything back. This is not a reason to play everything in a silly way, however, because sometimes if you playing things in a trigger happy way, you fill up your main monster zones, you fill up your back row, and then all of a sudden you can't play the cards that actually matter. So do keep that in mind. Yes, this is powerful, and yes, in most situations that'll just help you snowball into a win, but don't make dumb mistakes that lock you out of the deck. I know I've done it a few times as I've been playing around with the strategy, and it's not very fun. I did mention I was going to talk about Shizuku with this card, and the reason is this card says differently named spell cards in your graveyard you get to add to your hand, and it happens during your end phase. And Shizuku only lets you add a card from deck to hand if you don't already have it in your graveyard. But let's say you only have one copy of Widow Anchor. You can go and you play this, that counts as one. You can go ahead and resolve multi-roll first. Set your Widow Anchor face down. I'll put it like this so you can kind of see. And now Shizuku's going to check in the graveyard. Hey, you don't have Widow Anchor, and you can add another copy from deck to hand. That's another example of why I really love this deck. It's very much based on the core fundamental mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh, and as long as you realize that's how end phase mechanics work on these types of effects, you could go ahead and gain an advantage off of doing that. And while this may be obvious for people who've played the deck and something that I definitely alluded to in the video, I want to take a moment just to remind you, in case you've never seen this before, that because Ray's tribute effect is a quick effect during either turn, you could target her with either Area 0 or multi-roll, get her effect, dodge that send to grave, and still resolve both of their effects in full. So that's yet another way that this deck is able to utilize exact wording and mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh! In order to gain bigger advantages. So now it's time to talk about the other cards, now that we're done talking about the Sky Striker cards. We'll start off with one Rhoda, because all your key monsters are warriors, and this helps boost your count so that you see your opener successfully, consistently. We have one Upstart Goblin, because your opponent gaining 1,000 life points isn't the biggest deal in most situations, and because this is a quick spell card, you can just land in your graveyard really early on. This helps you get to the 3 as soon as possible. If this were at 3, you'd probably be playing it at 3. Next up, I really like 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. You've seen me play this in a few decks here and there, but I especially love it in Sky Striker because this lets you go and send cards from your hand or field to the graveyard in order to blank that same number of monsters your opponent has, making their effects negated and having their attack points. And wouldn't you know, this is a good way to play going second by sending all your spell cards to the graveyard that you don't need. Or heck, I could have played one of these 2, for example, and while it's still on the field, I can go ahead and send this to the graveyard, and then that counts as one of the 3 spells. So very powerful all around. Not only is it good for fighting against your opponent when you're going second, but it helps you set up that magic number of 3 spells in your graveyard, and it's just insanely powerful. And it, of course, by negating your opponent's effects, lets you go ahead and use other removal options like afterburners if your opponent normally can't be targeted. Do remember, however, that once you've negated a card with this or Widow Anchor, you can't then choose that same card with another card because it's already negated. So if you're playing Widow Anchor in this, just make sure you don't overlap them. Make sure you count correctly, because if you make it, so let's say your opponent has 3 monsters and you Widow Anchor 1 and you're trying to send 3 cards, you can no longer resolve this because you don't have 3 legal targets. You have to match exactly with Droplet. So little bit thing, but it can be a major setback if you do that. So watch out for that, and this card will be very powerful for you. I like playing 3 copies of Desires in this deck because easy spell in the graveyard, you're playing 3 of most of your key cards. You can go ahead and get rid of the one-ofs that you need to access very easily with things like Hayate and Shizuku, so no big threat as long as you're able to grab your key one-ofs first, even when they're limited. Just helps with consistency as well. Because we have our field spell package, unfortunately, is a copy of Mystic Mine. Of course, everyone hates this. I hate this card, but I found when you play the 1 copy of it, even with just the terraforming, it gives you an option because you don't always have to go Area 0, and this card can single-handedly lock down everything until you have enough resources to confidently permanently break apart your opponent's board. So we play the one copy, and we won't say too much more about Mystic Mine. However, I do want to say I like playing 2 copies of Twin Twister. Not only does the discard cost and free extra removal in killing 2 cards add up to very easily getting 3 spells in your graveyard, but you can even destroy your own Area 0 with this card in order to cheat out Ray or Rose. So this ends up being very flexible removal. And then some of those back row don't like going to the graveyard, or rather you don't want them to go to the graveyard, which causes us to play 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. Not everyone would play, 4 copies of removal, but I found that this was better for my specific tastes and uses right now than playing additional hand traps than the ones I'm about to go over. And that's kind of where I decided, let's play 2 and 2, and I do like that. But it also goes to illustrate that both of them work very well. It's a free spell in your graveyard, and it helps remove your opponent's threats that you may not be able to otherwise. It's another reason why jamming waves ends up being a bit too situational. I'd rather play these. Then I just play disruption hand traps here. You can change what you're playing, but for example, I like playing 3 Ash Blossom in this deck because it's still very flexible and helps with the theme of just blank everything in every deck. Next, I like playing 3 copies of Effect Failure. Not only is this just a really powerful negation body, but like Ash Blossom, it is a tuner monster, and that means we can go ahead and actually combine it with one of our cards to go into Needle Fiber, who will let us then summon out a Veiler, turn those into Selene, Queen of Master Magicians, and then you probably have at least 3 spells in your grave, so you revive back the Effect Failure and go into Access Code Talker, which obviously is a very powerful card that a lot of people like using in this engine, but especially in Sky Striker, you can cycle through all 4 elemental attributes, going through light, going through dark very easily, and you're going to blow up your opponent's entire board in most situations. So that card deserves a special mention in this situation because it's just that powerful. Yeah, it's just a very easy thing to do, especially because even if you're not using your own Needle Fiber, you can go ahead and use Shizuku as a water monster, summon Area the Water Charmer, and then when your opponent has their card in the graveyard, you go and steal that. You can easily load up all the other attributes anyway, but this plus Needle Fiber your opponent used is going to be Access Code Talker as well. So just 2 very easy ways to summon your key big monster, because this is how you basically win. You could go Borosword Dragon, but I do like the fact that this only needs 2 monsters and that there are 2 very easy Link 2 plays that allow you to do that. It's just a little more consistent, I feel. Then last card for the main deck is 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, but again, if in certain situations, like let's say Needle Fiber is banned when you're watching this, or you just don't want to play these specific hand traps, maybe Nibiru's better, maybe some other cards are better, go ahead and play those. The last 9 slots are honestly very flexible. I just chose this because holistically it worked a lot better for what I wanted to do and what I was used to and what I was playing against as well. And then the last card in the extra deck to top everything off is copy of Sky Striker Ace Zeke. This card's not bad. It's interesting. You don't summon it all the time for its abilities, but it's a very key player in terms of it being a flexible combo kind of piece in the deck. So it needs 2 monsters, including a Sky Striker Ace monster. That could be anything from using Rose and Ray, or it could be stealing your opponent's monster using your Shark Cannon or your Widow Anchor. So that's why it's written that way. Up and down arrows, I pretty much don't care about those. It must be Link summoned, so you cannot summon it off of Ray as a Link 2 you cheat out, so that's kind of balancing there. You can only special summon 1 Zeke per turn, much like the other Sky Striker Link monsters, and if this card's Link summoned, you can unfortunately target 1 face-up monster on the field, banish it until your opponent's next end phase, so pretty decent removal just to get something annoying out of the way and maybe clear off things like counters or Xyz materials or whatever. Then it has another ability that says once per turn you could target 1 other card you control, much like Area 0 or multi-roll, send that to the graveyard, and this card gains 1000 attack. It's actually worded that you gain 1000 attack first, then you send the selected card to the graveyard, which would make it so that your opponent's monsters would not gain their abilities if they have effects that somehow miss the timing in 2021. But that's just the way the card's worded. All around, it's a very interesting card for all of its traits. It's a Link 2, so it helps clear your board of monsters in your main monster zone. It can utilize your opponent's monsters effectively. It's a dark monster for Access Code Talker. It's able to pump itself up to 25, which is pretty solid. It's able to get rid of something temporarily. It's able to get rid of something else in your main monster zone in a very good way. Sometimes I wish I had 2 copies of this if I don't play this 1 copy very carefully, but it just depends. Sometimes you'll have room in the extra, sometimes you won't. I chose to play the other cards that I showed over a second Zeke, but you could very well play a second copy of this in case you wanted to use this for both combo and its abilities as well. The last comment I want to make for completeness is to mention the side deck. I kind of did before, but you want to play cards that are especially good going first, like There Can Be Only One. They can just cripple your opponent's strategy and make it so that they can't play easily against you, because chances are when they see they're playing against a deck that's very good going second, you want to be able to handle going first, kind of like Cyber Dragons may. Again, this deck does have its key cards like Widow Anchor, which technically could be used going first or second, but it does get a lot more powerful going second. You have cards like the hand traps to help soften your opponent's field, things like Forbidden Droplet to help fight back against them, and overall you probably have a decent shot at having better card economy than what your opponent is able to throw at you. However, you just want to make sure that all your removal options and such stick, so probably blind going second first, and then make sure when your opponent makes you go first afterwards, you have some plan, and then things should go a lot better for you in a match setting. And with that, we've successfully built Sky Strikers. Special thanks to anyone who watched the whole thing. I know it's a doozy, even with the YouTube chapter system, but hopefully you learned something new, even if it wasn't the first time you looked at Sky Strikers. We'll take a look at the main deck here now, 40 cards even. We have triple Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Effect Failure, and Sky Striker Ace Ray. Then we have double Rose or Rose, or however you like to say that, and that's it for a very slim monster count, even with our hand traps. For spells, we have double Cosmic Cyclone, triple Forbidden Droplet, one Mystic Mine, triple Pot of Desires, one Rhoda, double Area Zero, double Afterburners, one Hornet Drone, triple Shark Cannon, and triple Widow Anchor. Then we have one multi-roll. Then we have Terraforming, double Twin Twisters, and an Upstart Goblin. And then for traps, we just have 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence to wrap everything up at 40 again. Then for our extra deck, we have triple of Kagari, Shizuku, and Hayate, then 1 copy of Kaina. We have 1 copy of our Needle Fiber, and then we have 1 Area of the Water Charmer, Gentle. Then we have 1 Zeke, and those are our Link 2s. Link 3, we have Celine, Queen of Master Magicians, and then an Access Code Talker to pair with that for, again, 15 cards. That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.